Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be running through my team selection ahead of Game Week 10, as well as all of the key transfer tips, latest news and injuries to help you get set up ahead of Game Week 10 as well. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated, aiming for 100 likes on this one if at all possible. For now though, let's crack on with the show. Starting off with my team performance from Game Week 9, and honestly, I haven't really been looking forward to recording this section because it was an absolute car crash, and my season so far genuinely just hasn't gone to plan whatsoever. Now, I think there are a lot of managers out there who are experiencing a bit of a tough start this season as well, so if you're one of them, please don't lose faith just yet. This season is long. We've all had starts like this before, and hopefully we can turn it around with a few key moves. We'll get there. Now, with all of that being said, Game Week 9 was an absolute nightmare for me. It all started off after my team selection video from last week when we heard news from Ange that Son wasn't going to be fit for Game Week 9, despite the fact that he said it was a very minor injury earlier on in the week. That meant that I had to use my one free transfer to get rid of Son. I decided to downgrade that position, move it over to Johnson, who also obviously had the same fixture run, a good set of 3 fixtures there. But that crucially gave me the money to make an interesting move in Game Week 10 if I wanted to do so. More on that later. Now, it all got off to a pretty good start in Game Week 9 on the Saturday. Mbeumo obviously getting 2 goals, 1 right at the end as well. Haaland, I didn't triple captain him, so him only getting 1 return wasn't the end of the world. And Lewis also getting the clean sheet, which is rare for a Man City defender these days. Whilst Foden didn't return, he performed well. I didn't think I was that poorly placed. And then on Sunday, it all just went so badly wrong so quickly. Now, double Arsenal clean sheet wipeout. Gabriel goes off injured before the 60th minute, so I only get 1 point from him. Raya not only conceded twice, but also got the yellow card, so he had a 0-pointer. And then my Spurs triple up, which honestly I was pretty excited by, against Crystal Palace, who until that point were really struggling, obviously went and lost 1-0 to Crystal Palace and put out probably their worst performance of the season so far. So Porro, Johnson and Solanke, who I'll have to talk about a bit more later, all did absolutely nothing for me. And obviously Calvert-Lewin, rounding off the 11, did nothing either. Topping it all off as well, I forgot to mention, Rodgers came off before the 60th minute, looking quite tired throughout the match as well, so a 1-pointer from him as well. All of this means I'm 2.7 million after 9 game weeks. That is not where I wanted to be, but after a lot of thinking through the week and a lot of looking back at previous seasons, I don't think that this is a complete nightmare just yet. I think there are definitely ways that we can make up the ground. If you're struggling around this sort of rank, it's only a couple of points a week on average to claw back across the season, and you will have yourself in a pretty good position come the end of the year. Maybe taking a couple of risks here and there where possible, but don't lose faith just yet. 45 points though from Game Week 9. Absolute horror show. Fingers crossed, Game Week 10's looking a little better, and the rest of this video will go into how I plan on turning it all around. Okay, so a quick injury news roundup so far. We haven't had the press conferences just yet, so always keep an eye out for those. And of course, we're still waiting, at time of recording anyway, for the final Carabao Cup fixtures. So again, if there are any updates after those matches, I will leave them in the comment section below. So look out just in case you're watching this video at a later date. Top of the list, of course, is Gabriel, who went off around the 50th minute against Liverpool. Now, we've actually received some fairly positive news from Arteta, although take that with a pinch of salt. Arteta does often deceive us with the news, but it looks like it's a fairly minor injury, and I would actually say there's still a decent chance that he plays in Game Week 10. We will, of course, hear more before the deadline. We'll have more press conferences, but it doesn't look like a major injury, luckily. So any of you who own Gabriel, I would expect him to come back in pretty soon. If not Game Week 10, almost certainly Game Week 11 by this point at this point in time. So I'm not currently planning on selling him. In fact, I'm probably planning on starting him. And as long as you've got some sort of bench cover, I think that it's a risk worth taking. Moving down, Son, also relatively positive news. It looks like Ange is basically saying that he's going to be fit for game week 10. Now, of course, we've still got another press conference to come, so always listen out. But from the news we got in the midweek press conference ahead of the Carabao Cup fixture, he basically said that Son is aiming for the weekend to be ready, and he's going to miss out on the midweek game as a bit of a plan. So all roads at the moment point towards Son being fit for game week 10. Now, Diogo Jota sadly isn't as good news. It looks like he's not going to be available until at least after the international break. So that's after game week 10 and 11. And the earliest we'll see him is game week 12. Now, his ownership isn't that high, but those of you who have kept the faith in him, I would say that this is your opportunity to move away from him. And you've got at least 2 game weeks without him anyway. That's a lot of money to have on your bench. And there are other options around his price point who look thoroughly decent, and it's not like Jota's getting 90 minutes a game anyway, so I would probably move off if given the chance. After that, Dwight McNeil, we don't really know much on this just yet. It looks like a minor thing, and I would expect him to be fit for game week 10, but this is the one that at the moment we're shooting in the dark a little bit. We need a bit of an update. I would expect, if at all possible, he will start in game week 10 because, again, this is a relegation rival for Everton up against Southampton. They are going to want to take 3 points from this match. It's not a bit of a gimme like it would be against an Arsenal or a Man City, where you're not really expecting much. You can probably rest him if he's 75%. This is a game they'll want to win, and if Dwight McNeil is anywhere near fit, I think he starts. After that, Lewis Dunk, again, not massively owned, but this does come into play with some of the captaincy choices for this week and the next couple as well. It does look like he's going to be out for a month, which means that the next couple of game weeks, whoever's playing Brighton is going to have an opportunity against a pretty rotated backline, or at least centre-back pairing that hasn't played together all that much. And we saw what happened against Chelsea when they didn't have the ideal partnership at centre-back. They got absolutely torn to shreds. So I would just worry if I was investing in Brighton defence, but also if I didn't have players that were going up against Brighton in the next couple of game weeks, I'll come on to them in a minute, that maybe you're a little bit exposed. So maybe an opportunity there if you hadn't already thought about it. So now on to some of the key transfer targets ahead of game week 10. Number 1, top of the list for me, is Mo Salah. Now he is one of the players that gets to play Brighton in game week 10. Obviously, Liverpool go up against them at home as well. So a very decent fixture there anyway, just due to the way that Brighton's set up anyway. But now, considering they're also without their leader at the back, their centre-back partnership as well, Lewis Dunk being out means that I would expect Liverpool to be able to take advantage there. Now, Salah, we don't really need to talk about what a great player he is. We know that. But the data this season, whilst down a little bit, isn't down enough that I wouldn't consider him to be a leading option for this week. 0.76 so far this season, XGI per 90. That is a little bit short of what we'd expect from him. But crucially, the bonus points that he's getting this year are way, way up on any other season, and that's due to the way that the bonus point system has been restructured. Now, I won't go into the ins and outs of it. Go and watch Above Average FPL or FPL Therapy, who had Baker 343 on this week, and they go into this in a lot more detail than I'm going to today, basically for brevity reasons. But what it does all mean is that if Salah comes away with 1 goal, he's much, much more likely to get bonus points than he has done in previous seasons. So all of that means if Salah even gets 1 goal in any given game week, that goal might not be worth 5 points anymore. It's much more likely to be worth 7 or 8 when you account for the bonus points added on. Now, just as a bit of proof on this, last season, I believe he got 25 bonus points. This season, after 9 game weeks, he's got 16 already. So that just goes to show the amount of bonus points that are flying towards him at the moment that are in his favour. I just think he's far too good to ignore for the next 3 game weeks if you can get to him in a relatively easy way. And I'll go on to some of the routes to that in just a moment's time. Now, we've got 3 strikers on this list. That's Wissa, Wood, and Cunha. I talked about all 3 of them in my transfer tips video earlier on this week. So if you really want a detailed analysis of each, I would look at that. Starting with Wissa. Now, he is the cheapest of the 3, which really helps me out, especially with one of my transfer options ahead of this week, but the data is also much better than both of the other 2 right now. It's a limited sample size, and unfortunately, unlike the others, he doesn't have penalties, but I think the data is up at an elite level right now. It's 0.93, I believe, XGI per 90. And whilst I wouldn't expect that to go on all season at that exact rate, it's still going to look very decent for a player that's under 6 million. Brentford also, and again, if you haven't watched this yet, go and watch the Thomas Frank interview on Sky Sports that went out over the week. Really goes into detail about how Brentford create chances and the way that they prioritise creating high XG chances to kind of remove any doubt around the finishing. So Wissa and Mbeumo are incredibly good options because the chances they're going to be presented with this season, and pretty much any time that Thomas Frank's in charge, will be higher XG chances more often than any other striker or forward option that we have available to us. So I really like Wissa. I don't expect him to be a 90-minute man every single week, but I think the minutes will be easily good enough for him to be a very solid FPL option over the next 5 or 6 game weeks. The fixtures are also very good. Now, Chris Wood, I think out of these 3, despite being 3rd on the list, I would actually maybe change that and put him 1 below Cunha at the moment. Now, it's not that I think that Chris Wood isn't a fantastic pick. He's obviously done really well this season. But the data suggests, and again, you might not necessarily believe in XG at this point because Chris Wood is obviously just finishing everything, but predicting points, what we've got to go on is actual returns and the data that we've seen from those returns. And what we can gather from that is that he is overperforming, which means he's on a hot streak, by the way. That might continue. But hot streaks are relatively difficult to predict when you look at seasons past, and you don't know when they're going to come to an end. Now, he's running at about 0.5 XGI per 90. That's still very good for a 6.3, 6.4 million option. But you would expect 7 goals in 9 game weeks to be a little bit over what maybe he's going to perform at for the rest of the season. Next game week as well, West Ham at home, very decent. Newcastle after that, but the fixtures aren't quite as nice moving forward as they have been in the last few game weeks, although it is worth noting that they've got Ipswich at home also coming up in the next 4 as well. So it's not all too bad just yet. It does turn in, I think, 4 or 5 game weeks time though. Now, the reason that I think Cunha possibly pips both of them is because of the routes to points. And whilst the data is slightly poorer than Wood and Wissa right now, he has had the worst fixture run possibly imaginable for any team so far. And his data is still 0.46 XGI per 90. That suggests, to me at least, that should improve over what is now an absolutely insane fixture run for the next 10 game weeks. Now, I think it's from game week 10 to game week 20. I've never really seen a fixture run as good as this in my recent memory. And Wolves, whilst not being the best Premier League team, you'd still expect them to score enough goals that Cunha is going to be a fantastic pick. Now, it's not just the fact that he's a goal scorer, he's also a quality player, which obviously always helps, but he's also got so many different routes to points. He's on penalties, he takes corners from both sides, and he's on set pieces just throughout the team. And again, the data will increase, but everything kind of runs through him at the moment. And whilst he's not playing the exact same position, he does remind me a little bit of a Cole Palmer at Chelsea, where pretty much everything good that goes on within the team is at some point being touched by Cunha. And I think more often than not, he is finding himself in that final phase of play where it's either the assist or the goal. And I really genuinely think that if I had the budget, I would probably prioritise Cunha ahead of Wissa and Wood just because of those routes to points alongside the fixture run. Now, after that, a quick mention for the other Wolves player that will be interesting. That is Ait Nouri. Now, I think he is by far the best 4.5 million defender that you can go and buy right now. Again, for the fixture reasons, but also I just think it's in his nature to be so far forward, no matter what system they play, and they might revert to a back four now. But even with that in mind, I just think it's ingrained within him that he's almost got that left winger mentality that he just has to get forward, and O'Neill is encouraging that as well. And even with that system change, I expect that to continue. Now, the only negative point against Ait-Nouri right now is he's on 4 yellow cards. It's been spoken about a lot, but again, with the fixture run to come, you're not just looking at him for 1 game week, and you're not going to be too bothered if he misses 1 week, which, by the way, if you don't already know, if he gets the 5th yellow, he misses 1 game week. And that we're nowhere near the cutoff point for suspension, so he is almost certainly going to miss 1 of the next 10. But even if that happens, as long as you've got a bench cover that you don't mind playing in 1 week, I think the data suggests that he's a good enough pick at 4.5 that you just go for him anyway, and whenever he does get that suspension, you can just kind of handle it and absorb it into the longer term strategy. So let me know who your key transfer targets are ahead of Game Week 10 in the comments below, and of course if you agree or disagree with any of the picks here. Right then, so let's take a quick look at the match projections ahead of Game Week 10 via RobT FPL on Twitter. Do go and check him out, he's got some great graphics on there, so thanks again to him. There are 3 teams that really stand out this week that are all over an average of 2 goals expected via the bookies odds for Game Week 10. Starting off with Spurs at 2.05. That was a bit of a surprise for me because, one, they weren't that great against Crystal Palace, I think it's fair to say, but also the opposition this week, despite being at home, Villa are a good side and a Champions League side, of course, and I was a bit surprised to see Spurs favoured to get over 2 goals against them. Now, that might be in part down to the fact that Spurs so far have been very impressive on average from an attacking point of view, and I think via most different platforms that you can check out this data, they are second for XG in the league so far this season. So very encouraging if you do own Spurs attack, especially the likes of Johnson or Son, maybe less so Solanke so far considering he's barely had a shot in the last 3 game weeks. But again, I'll come on to him in just a moment's time. Now, looking at the next up, it's Man City away at Bournemouth, 2.15 expected for them. Now, again, I think that this is a matchup that really does favour Man City. Bournemouth, especially under Iraola so far, have been absolutely torn apart by Man City, and the way that they set up really favours Man City's approach. Now, that final pass in behind the lines via a high line for Bournemouth, Haaland is an absolute specialist at that exact thing, and getting in behind their defence, I can see happening 3 or 4 times, even at the Vitality Stadium. There is, of course, limited space there, but I think Man City are smart enough to break down Bournemouth, and I think that this is a very good matchup, especially if Foden plays centrally again. I can see him unpicking that lock at regular intervals, like he did against Southampton as well, by the way. And if Haaland's got his shooting boots on, it could be a very interesting day at the office for both him and Foden and Man City in general. Now, moving up to Liverpool, who are expected to get the most goals on average of any team this game week, 2.55 at home to Brighton. Again, a matchup I really like the look of, especially without Lewis Dunk in the middle. I can see Brighton, we've seen it so far this season against the likes of Chelsea, still playing that extremely high line at times, playing out from the back in that slow build-up phase, but what it does is it brings them up the pitch in banks of 4, especially at the back, and it means that they've got a very large gap in behind for the attacking players from the opposition to run into. As soon as they retrieve the ball on the turnover, they are going to want to play the ball over that back line, and if any single one of that Brighton back 4 isn't on their toes, they are going to be able to capitalise on that and have at least a 5-6 metre head start. When you've got the likes of Luis Diaz, Salah and Darwin running beyond the last man in those sort of instances, the only thing I can really see is a lot of big chances being created there. And it's a key reason why I think Liverpool, especially this week, but certainly over the next 3 as well, are a really good team to be trying to target for the next 3 fixtures. Now, Brighton as well are not a bad side, but I just think the matchup suits Liverpool really, really well, especially at home where they've been absolutely phenomenal so far this season. A few interesting ones elsewhere. Even away from home, Arsenal are expected 1.7 goals on average against Newcastle. Same goes for Man United and Chelsea, both expected 1.75, which is a little bit higher than I expected, maybe in both cases, but certainly for Man United. And it does go to show that even with maybe not the best of fixtures, Cole Palmer could still be a fantastic option this week. Expected 1.75 goals as a team. I think he's been involved in something like 60% of their goals so far. So you would expect him to get around 1 attacking return on average against Man United. So after looking at the match projections, I think it makes sense to look at the Captaincy Matrix ahead of Game Week 10 as well. And 2 options for me really do stand out because of the matchups I just spoke about. Haaland and Salah, I believe, have a very good chance of going big this week. Now, Salah in particular, especially because it's that home game, and because he's in midfield, so it's an extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet, and he's a monster on bonus, as I discussed earlier on in the video. I think, to me, he stands out as the best captaincy option this week. And Fantasy Football Hub's projections also agree with me. 8.1 expected points for him, 7.7 for Haaland, not far behind. And again, I do really like the matchup. I just think that away from home, and the fact that the bonus points aren't maybe as weighted towards him, because if he misses any big chances, that kind of goes against him a little bit. I think that Salah is maybe very slightly ahead of him for captaincy this week. Now, this brings me to a slightly more meta point, and this is around the transfers you might be making ahead of Game Week 10. A lot of managers I'm seeing out there at the moment are considering selling Haaland, even for a hit in some cases, to bring in Mo Salah. Now, obviously, if you think Mo Salah is the best captaincy choice this week, which I do, it obviously makes sense to try and bring him in if at all possible. But I do think that some time needs to be spent thinking about what a good option Haaland is for the next 3 game weeks against Bournemouth, then Brighton, who again will be without Lewis Dunk yet again and playing that really high line like I discussed with Salah, and then Spurs at home, who again, set up in a very similar way, will get spun in behind on the turn, and Haaland is one of the best in the world at doing that and getting in behind with that very quick off the mark run to spin the centre-backs. Now, if Haaland does that in these next 3 games and you've sold him for Mo Salah, it might work out that Salah gets even more points. That's absolutely fair enough, especially if you think he's a better captaincy choice, which I personally do in 2 of the next 3 game weeks. But selling Haaland, especially for a hit, just doesn't quite sit right for me at the moment, because I do think that he is going to have a very decent shot at a haul in Game Week 10, and then probably in Game Week 11 and 12 is looking pretty decent as well. Now, there's a wider point here, which is he's a lot more money than Salah, a lot more money than Palmer or Saka as well, and at some point, I do subscribe to the feeling that he's not going to be good enough value for money to hold on to longer term when Salah, Palmer and Saka are all on red hot form. And at the moment, they all are. So if you've got an easy route to get rid of Haaland without a hit, and you're absolutely, utterly convinced that Salah is by far the best option this week, and that the upgrade you can make on that second transfer, so let's say you get rid of a Rodgers, for instance, in midfield, upgrade it to Salah, what can you move Haaland to? That second player, if it's a Cunha, if it's a Nick Jackson, for instance, I would say that both of those players, or Wissa perhaps, are all upgrades on Rodgers. So as a combination, it's a stronger duo that I would expect to score more points. But you do have to consider the amount of transfers you're using. Does that impact future plans? And could it mean that there are future hits down the line that you would have to take if you did make those moves? And if so, then that's almost a hit that you're locking yourself into by making this move. And it's kind of not for free anyway. It's kind of for a hit if you think about it with those parameters. Now, there are some of you out there that will be able to get Salah and Haaland. I might be one of those, by the way. And if you can, I think that is the ideal combination for the next 2, maybe 3 game weeks. I don't completely hate selling Haaland to get Salah, but definitely not for a hit. And I think that if you are going to make that switch, just be careful with some future planning, that the transfers you make now aren't going to lead you down a bit of a rabbit hole where you need to take a hit in a few game weeks' time. Now, the other two options that, of course, we need to talk about are Palmer and Saka, who go up against Man United and Newcastle, respectively. I don't think too many managers will take a punt on them as captainable options this week, but one or two might, and they're still expected to do very well this week, as we've seen with the premiums throughout the season. There aren't many games that they could possibly play where they're not expected 6+ points, because both of these players are getting a return pretty much every single week. In fact, they're running over an attacking return per game. 12 so far for Palmer, 10 so far for Saka in one less game as well. They are, of course, in the form of their lives. And again, a bit of a meta point, they're running at the same sort of XGI per 90 as Salah, and also have the penalties that Salah has too. So I think long term, for less money, these two could be perhaps even better options than Salah. But especially in the short term, I think Salah's fixtures are so good that maybe I would place him above the duo right now. But I do need a plan to get to both of them, even if they're not necessarily top of the captaincy matrix for this game week. So moving on to my transfers ahead of game week 10. The first option, and I kind of hinted at it a minute ago, is to sell Foden to bring in Mo Salah. Now, Foden's data on very limited minutes, on a very small sample size, is actually very good. It rivals Salah's on surface level. So 0.72 XGI per 90 versus 0.76 for Salah. So on a surface level, you'd say maybe this isn't a transfer that is necessarily required. But what I would say is the majority, in fact, the overwhelming majority of that XGI is on assist threat rather than goal threat. So obviously less points for that. And Foden's minutes aren't as secure, even if he has played himself back into their strongest starting lineup now, which I believe he has. And I don't think that I can sit here confidently and say that he definitely starts the next 2 or 3 game weeks. If I could, I might maybe reassess this move and say, you know what? Foden, even without penalties, is playing in a very good attacking side. And if he was guaranteed 80+ minutes in the next 3 game weeks against Bournemouth, Brighton and Spurs, he could absolutely haul in every single one of those games, especially because Pep was saying that I want him as close to Haaland as possible on the pitch. So we could see hat-trick potential like we saw last season at times for Phil Foden. However, with all of that being weighed up, I still think this move makes sense for me. I think that there is no universe in which I captain Phil Foden in the next 3 game weeks. Salah for me is probably going to be my captain in at least 2 of the next 3 game weeks. So that's tick 1 for Salah. He's also on penalties, which Foden isn't, tick number 2. And he's also got a much better goal threat. So XG per 90 is, I think, triple, if not quadruple, what Foden's putting up so far off of a much larger sample size. We also know that he is the talismanic figure for Liverpool, and even off of 1 attacking return, as I mentioned earlier, he's very likely to get maximum bonus. Foden is almost the antithesis of that, where Haaland is just such a hoover for points and for goals that if Foden, let's say, assists twice in a game, I still think he's maximum going to get 2 bonus points, because it's very likely the player he assisted was Haaland in both cases, and he's obviously going to get the 2 goals and therefore the 3 bonus as well. So whilst Foden is a good option, and I don't love selling him this week because I think he can do well, I think Salah is superior to him by that extra money. And selling Son for Johnson last week has enabled me to make this move without selling Haaland, which I think is something that maybe we won't see too many people in the community able to do. So fingers crossed, this gives me a little bit of an advantage for the next 3 game weeks. Now, onto the strikers. DCL is on the sheet here, but I also will talk about Solanke briefly. There's a big part of me, especially after the Sunday games, that wanted to just bin off 2 of my 3 forwards straight away, both Dominics, Solanke and Calvert-Lewin. A quick word on Solanke so far. Now, he's been incredibly frustrating. I think 0.03 XG per 90 on average from the last three. That is worse than almost every player that's played minutes in the last 3 game weeks, including centre-backs, including full-backs. But it is worth noting that even with those last 3 game weeks in mind, he's still running at 0.5 XG per 90, which goes to show that for him, it is very much either feast or famine so far. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's been these last 3 game weeks in a row that we've seen the poor data. I think there has been a tactical switch, which has meant that he's not been so involved at the very sharp end of the pitch in the final third. He's almost been dropping deep, a bit like Harry Kane did back in the day, and linking up play. And when he does that, the wingers get on beyond him, break the lines, and he's just not fast enough to kind of catch up with them and get on the end of any crosses into the box. You've seen it so many times in the last 3 game weeks where he actually does something really good in the middle, but because the action happens 20, 30 yards up the pitch at the end of the move, he hasn't quite made it into that position to get off a shot, and either a Johnson or a Son, maybe even sometimes a Kulusevski, is the one on the end of it. Now, I don't think that will go unnoticed by Ange, and I'd be surprised if there isn't a tactical switch back to something that enables Solanke to get on the end of some of these chances again. Now, against Villa, against Ipswich, both home games, obviously, if he blanks in both of them, he's an immediate sell, but I still hold on some hope that over the next couple of game weeks, they are decent matchups, especially that Ipswich game. And I do back Ange to kind of figure out what's going wrong, because it definitely wouldn't have escaped his notice that his key talismanic record signing striker hasn't been getting any shots off. That will be an issue that they're trying to solve, and I'd imagine they solve it sooner rather than later. So for me, reluctantly, I'm going to hold on to him for the next couple of game weeks, even though I think that there are other strikers that maybe I prefer. I don't want to sell him for a hit. Now, the same probably goes for Calvert-Lewin, and I think he's got a weaker case to be held, even though he's got Southampton in the next game week. The data's not great. He runs very far below his expected goals in terms of his Premier League career. I think he's gotten something like 65, maybe 64 goals from something like 82, 83 XG, which means that for a striker, he's a very poor finisher on average. But he has been a little unlucky in the last couple of game weeks. A goal that was offside, one I think that were 1 week even against Ipswich where Muric was playing an absolute blinder and he could have easily scored in that week. But equally, how long can you hold on to a player like that who just isn't getting attacking returns when there are others at his price and below that are getting attacking returns week on week with better data and good fixtures to come? Now, those 2 players are Wissa, who I've already spoken about, and Raul Jimenez, who I didn't have time for earlier, but is also a very good budget striker who's putting up phenomenal underlying attacking data right now. Now, they play each other this week, and whilst weirdly Brentford at home is seen as the easier fixture, possibly just because it's the home fixture, I think I'd probably just about prefer Wissa. Now, there's definitely an argument to say that Jimenez is the best pick, and I would say that he's quite likely to get penalties off of Andreas Pereira, who took a bit of a shocking penalty last time up. So I think that Jimenez could be the better option, but I back Wissa in a more, let's say, chance-creating team than Fulham are. Brentford create a lot of high XG chances. Wissa is playing centrally, and he's got a much longer track record of good goal returns when he's on the pitch. And I think that it might just be a bit of a gut thing. I kind of back Thomas Frank and I back Brentford just that little bit more to go big in certain games and get 3-4 goals in specific games. Whereas with Fulham, I think more often than not, I'm expecting 2 at a maximum. So I'm kind of haul chasing here if I was to make this move. So let me know in the comments whether or not you think that for a hit, it's worth getting rid of DCL, or whether you would maybe just give him the Southampton game and reassess afterwards when I could get rid of him for free for either one of these players. So finally, on to my team selection ahead of Game Week 10. I have already made my free transfer. I made it really early on this week, mainly because I only had 0.1 wiggle room, and Salah looked like he was going up pretty quickly. And honestly, I just kind of felt like I needed to take a little bit of action and regain some control after what was a very poor game week. So I've taken a bit of a risk. I've brought in Mo Salah early for Foden, which means that the armband is on him, as he is my favoured captaincy option for this game week, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, Haaland isn't far behind, but I think Salah just shades it because of that home fixture and because of the way the bonus points are working out in his favour right now. Now, looking elsewhere in my side, double Arsenal defence I'm likely to start with. I do think that Southampton score at home to Everton, and if I apply that logic, I think Mykolenko is relatively low upside when it comes to attacking threat. So I'm happy enough benching him. And look, if Gabriel is injured, then I don't mind him coming off my bench. I think it's absolutely fine if that is the case. But I will always back the Arsenal defence as a superior defence if they're fit, especially with the goal threat that Gabriel carries from corners. I will always back him ahead of Mykolenko unless he's got an absolutely horrible fixture and Mykolenko's got a dream one. So that is the logic behind having Gabriel starting, even though he's a doubt. Obviously, not a massive chance of a clean sheet away at Newcastle, but Newcastle themselves haven't been in incredible form, so who knows? Maybe I get lucky on that one. It is about time that I get a little bit of luck from that double Arsenal defence, who have so far, since I've wildcarded, been absolutely horrendous. Triple Spurs at home to Villa. Again, the projection suggests that they should be pretty decent for attacking returns this week. I'm not expecting a clean sheet for Porro, but who knows, I might luck out with an attacking return. And Johnson and Solanke, whilst I'm frustrated with Solanke, I do think that these next two suit him from a matchup point of view. And I'm hoping that Ange has enough wherewithal to switch the system back in his favour so he does pick up big chances once again. Same goes for Johnson. I think that, again, he has a decent chance of getting some attacking returns in this fixture. Obviously, if I was picking a free hit, he wouldn't be in it, but he's not worth selling ahead of Aston Villa and Ipswich at home for me right now. Mbeumo and Rodgers make up the midfield. Mbeumo just phenomenal so far, going absolutely nowhere. Even when the fixtures turn, I think I'll hold on to him. Rodgers did look tired in game week 9, but I think he's a better player to be starting than Semenyo. And because it's such a big game for Villa, I would expect them to start their strongest possible 11. And that absolutely includes Rodgers at the moment. He has been phenomenal so far this season. Not necessarily just from an FPL point of view and good value for money for us, but on the pitch, he's looked an absolute elite performer for Villa and a real standout player in the Premier League so far. So I do expect him to retain his starting spot. And Semenyo can come off my bench if there is any sort of weird system change that I'm not expecting. Up front, Solanke, I've already discussed. Calvert-Lewin probably stays for one more week. I am tempted to take a hit to get rid of him because I'm sick of looking at him. But away at Southampton just feels absolutely criminal to be getting rid of a player. And despite the fact that there maybe is a chance that he does get benched after Beto came on and got the equaliser last week, I think it's more likely than not that he does retain the starting spot. And therefore, I think I've got to hold on to him just for one more week. And if I need to get rid of him, I will absolutely do so next week with absolutely no regrets whatsoever over getting rid of him. In fact, the only regrets I will have if I do have to get rid of him next week is not doing it any sooner. Overall, though, I don't hate my starting 11. I think Salah, as my captain, is going to be a relatively decent differential captaincy because I think a lot more people will have Haaland and not be able to get to Salah, and I think even less will have both of them. So I'm hoping, and I'm crossing my fingers, that that is in itself enough of a differential as a compound thing to help propel me back up the ranks this game week a little bit, because I do need to start regaining some rank very, very soon. In the meantime, though, let me know if you've enjoyed the video, of course. If you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And as always, if you've got any questions of your own ahead of the deadline, please do leave them in the comments below, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. In the meantime, good luck in Game Week 10, and I'll see you as we start preparing for Game Week 11 early next week.